Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are all doing well. Today is the first of hopefully several vlogs where I make my way through the Women's Prize long list. So for those of you guys that don't know, I've been following the Women's Prize for a very long time. I really enjoy seeing which books are selected for the long list and then which books of those make the short list and of course the winner. But before this year, I haven't really challenged myself to make it all the way through the long list, which is my goal this year. I know that that is very ambitious. There are some very long books on this year's list, but I'm going to do my best to share my thoughts, my feelings through reading these stories. So I'm very excited to share this journey with you. If I make it all the way through or if I don't, I would love to know if you are reading any of the books on the Women's Prize long list and how long have you been following the prize for. But without further ado, let's chat through the 4 books that I'm going to be reading for this week's vlog. Alright, the first one I'm going to be reading is The Bread the Devil Knead by Lisa Allen Augustini. This is a book set in Trinidad about an abusive relationship, and then the woman in this relationship witnesses a incident of domestic violence, and she starts to kind of rethink her own relationship. Next we have Remote Sympathy by Catherine Chidgey. This is a book set in World War II. It follows a couple of perspectives. One is a young family in Germany, and the father is a Nazi officer, and he is moving to just outside the Buchenwald camp to be an officer in the camp. And then his wife Greta is diagnosed with cancer shortly after they move. And then the other perspective is a prisoner who has a machine that supposedly can cure the type of cancer that his wife has. So I'm definitely intrigued by this one. This is a chunky book. It is over 500 pages, which is the longest book I've read in a while. Next we have The Paper Palace by Miranda Cowley Heller. The beginning of this book starts with a woman having a sexual encounter with somebody that she has loved for her whole life, but she just so happens to also be married with children, and it flashes back through her life and how her decisions have led her to this point. And finally, we have Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. I don't actually have the hold for this book yet, but I will put it up on the screen. And this is a book about a woman's struggle with mental illness and how that mental illness kind of affects her relationship. I've heard it's very contemporary, very funny and witty, and I'm really excited to get into it. All right, so those are the reading plans this week. I'm planning to start with this one, try and get the longest one out of the way first. So I will catch up with you soon with my first initial thoughts. So it's another very snowy Saturday. I thought it was springtime, but apparently not. I'm currently working the night shift, so my hours have been like 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. ish, so I just woke up. My shifts have actually been very chill, so I've actually had some time to read on them, and I wanted to give you guys my first update for Remote Sympathy, which is the very first book that I have picked up on the list. So this book takes place in World War II, and you're kind of following 2 different storylines. The first one is about a German officer who's been assigned to work at a concentration camp, and his wife Greta. And they're kind of moving and getting adjusted into living in this new home close to the concentration camp. For the most part, you get that perspective through Greta, and it's really interesting because so much of her life is like getting the house together and cooking for their child, and there isn't really a lot of acknowledgement of the camp yet, but she's starting to get little glimpses of what truly is going on. And the other perspective is about a doctor who is married to a Jewish woman. His whole life work has been around making this machine called, I think it's called the sympathetic vitalizer, and the idea is that this machine, by inserting some energy into the body at some frequency, could make a tumor disappear. The machine kind of gives the title of the book Remote Sympathy, the idea that like energy from one part of the body can transfer and have some other consequence. So far, this book has just been such a surprise, and a good surprise. I find myself just so addicted to both of these storylines. I find this book extremely readable. There's all these kind of interesting relationships, conflicts that are introduced, and I think it's very well plotted. This book is kind of told in like letters and diary format, but I don't find that format like too distracting. Sometimes I kind of prefer if it's just in a narrative rather than like different documents or diaries or letters or that kind of thing. But I feel like it works really well here. I'm interested to see how this idea, remote sympathy, kind of plays its way into this book, because I think it's going to be a huge theme through many aspects of this story, and I'm already enjoying seeing how it is tied into the different parts. So far, this is one of the books on Goodreads that had the fewest reviews, and I am just absolutely blown away by the writing, by the characters, by the plot, and I just cannot wait to see where this one goes. So I have to get ready for my night shift. Tomorrow is Selection Sunday. For non-sports fans, that is the day where all of the college basketball teams get selected for the big tournament at the end of the season, March Madness, and it's one of my favorite days because I'm a huge sports fan, and so I like just seeing how the bracket's gonna play out and watching this selection show. So the plan is to wake up after my night shift in time for that. But anyways, I am going to do a bit more reading before heading off to work. So it's currently Sunday. Gilbert is scratching on the scratching post behind me, so sorry if you can hear that in the background. It has been a super rainy, dreary day today. I've just been on the couch doing some reading. I got my car detailed, so I was without a vehicle for a while, which was kind of a weird in between thing where you can't go out and do anything, but you're just waiting to get your car back. I watched a little bit of women's basketball today. It's just been a very cozy, chill day at home. But I did finish my first book on the Longlist, so I wanted to chat with you guys a little bit more about some of my thoughts. So I finished Remote Sympathy by Katherine Chidkey a couple of days ago, and I kind of ended up having some conflicted feelings about this one. So I did really enjoy the beginning part of it. I found myself being drawn towards each of these different perspectives as we were introduced to them. My personal favorite to read from was Greta, who is the wife of the German officer who is suffering from cancer. I thought her passages were really interesting. I was always kind of engaged in her chapters. Unfortunately, towards the end of the book, I felt like we were getting more and more kind of chapters from her husband's perspective in the future as he's writing to kind of defend himself for the things that he did while he was an officer in the concentration camp. I found those chapters to be so infuriating to read, and I didn't think that they added anything to the story, honestly. I felt like they got a little bit too long-winded after a while, and I think out of all the characters, he was the least interesting because he was the least morally gray. He was just evil. He didn't really have anything redeemable about him, so as a reader, there wasn't anything particularly interesting about reading his perspective, and it just kind of went on and on and on, unfortunately. And I guess that is my biggest critique of this book. I feel like the end really dragged out. I think it could have easily been 100 to 150 pages shorter and given the same message, gotten the same story across. So one of my favorite dynamics in this story was between the doctor who has this machine that's trying to cure Greta's cancer and Greta herself. There's a lot of like moral grayness and complexity between their different plot lines. I really appreciated that aspect to it. As the story goes on, it becomes increasingly clear that the doctor is using this machine in a way to protect himself and potentially have the ability to see his family again, because if he has this machine that can cure one of the officer's wives, then he's not disposable. And that kind of like conflict, I think, was really well done in here. But yeah, as I said, it was just a bit too long, a bit too drawn out. And so I ended up giving this one, I think, like a 3.75 stars. Definitely a solid read, a solid start to the short list, but just not my favorite. Gilbert is here to join this little reading wrap up. If you guys are new, Gilbert is my cat. He is a Manx, so he does not have a tail, and he loves to randomly be in every clip, in every vlog. But I wanted to chat with you about my thoughts of The Paper Palace. So I thought I had filmed a like middle of the book update for this book, but I realized that I didn't have any footage. So I either didn't film it or I did film it and completely forgot and lost the footage. Anyways, I'm just going to unpack all of my thoughts about this one in one clip, so we'll see. I've been trying to be better about writing down my thoughts as I read and documenting what I'm thinking more as I read. And for this book, I wrote, no one in this story is particularly redeemable, except maybe the sister. People made dumb decision after dumb decision. The ending was very anticlimactic. I hate stories about infidelity and miscommunication. And then for my memorable quotes, I said, quote, if I could fly backwards, I would, and which is kind of one of the central passages to the story, because a lot of this book is about kind of regrets in the decisions we make and having to live with those decisions. And I wrote ... and so would I, and not read this book. So while I was maybe a little bit extra, a little bit sassy when writing those remarks, I just really didn't enjoy this story, unfortunately. I will say I listened to this entire book on audio, and I didn't read any of it physically, and I honestly regret that decision, because at the beginning of the story, you're going between the present day and then flashing back to the past when our main characters are growing up throughout their childhood and as they're getting older. And I feel like it was difficult for me to kind of put those timelines together and remember all of the different characters that were introduced because of the format that I consumed. And I don't know if any of you guys are like this, but for me to really grasp an audiobook, it has to be a certain type of book where I just can like sink into the story, and one where I'm flashing between different time points and maybe isn't quite as straightforward, I don't tend to do as well with. But anyways, what do I say about this book? My central issue with this book was what it was about. I do not like reading books about infidelity. I do not like reading books about miscommunication, especially people that are miscommunicating about dumb decisions that they've made and not being mature about where they're at and what they need to do. And I felt like this entire book was just dishonesty after miscommunication, after plot convenience. I found almost every character in this book to be extremely unredeemable and frustrating. And I don't know if it was written so that you like the main character, Elle, who is the woman that kind of cheats on her husband at the very beginning, which is not a spoiler. It's like in the synopsis and it's happening in the first chapter. I don't know if you're supposed to like her, if she's supposed to be, I'm not sure how the reader's supposed to feel about her, but I was just unbelievably frustrated by almost everything that she did. And the man that she cheated on her husband with, I also thought was really obnoxious, and her husband wasn't particularly likable either to me. And then her mother was just like next level, really did not like her. I think that there are some books with unlikable characters that I do get behind and that I do really enjoy, but this one, because it was so character driven and because so much of this book was their decisions, it just became this frustrating web of me wanting to change everything they were doing rather than me kind of appreciating the book for what it was. I thought the end of this book was pretty anticlimactic. I thought that I expected it to end where it did because I thought if it ended any other way, it would have not really made sense as a story. I think I touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but one of my other big issues with this book was the dual kind of timeline, the present day as we're following this woman kind of grappling of the decision she's made to sleep with this other man, and then us flashing back to her growing up. I just felt like because the flashbacks were pretty brief and you were moving throughout time pretty quickly, I didn't really sink into the story of her past as much as I would have hoped or would have wanted to. So I'm not sure that format really worked for me. I do think this book was written pretty well. I think that there were some really beautiful passages. I do think it was pretty readable. And as I was making my way through the audiobook, I kind of wanted to know what was going to happen, even if I didn't really care about the characters that much. But this as a whole book just didn't really come together for me, unfortunately. I haven't read anything else by this author. I'm not sure if she's written anything else, but unfortunately this was a bit of a miss. I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars.
Yesterday, there was sun and there was rain, beauty in the mundane. And as the light startled our eyes, we let go of disguise. And now, there's something in the air, and a sparkly shimmer on our skin, restoring everything within. Oh, dreamy, breezy, we go. Easy, easy on our tiptoes, undercover agents of the other. Beyond gravel, beyond all.
So I'm popping in to chat with you guys about my thoughts for Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. So I listened to this one exclusively on audiobook, and I'm actually really happy that I did. I felt like this was the perfect book to consume that way. I thought it was pretty straightforward in terms of the plot, so I wasn't getting confused if I missed a little bit of the audiobook, which sometimes I do as I'm listening in the car. Sometimes I'll zone out for a second. I also felt that because of the way that this book was in terms of its voice, it just really lent itself well to listening to it as an audiobook. But this is a story about a woman named Martha who is nearing her 40th birthday, and it's kind of about her entire struggle with mental health, both with depression and also with a kind of unnamed mental health diagnosis, which is just referred to in the book as X. And X is not a real mental health diagnosis because the author didn't really want to make this about one specific thing, but rather about how mental health is dealt with and how it can affect people's relationships. I loved this book so much, and I know that this is very presumptuous to say, but I would be absolutely shocked if this is not my favorite book on the entire long list. Some of you guys know that at the beginning of this year, I was really struggling with my own personal mental health. I have struggled with anxiety for my whole life, and there are times where it's particularly bad and times where I don't really even notice it that much. And the beginning of this year, for a lot of different reasons that I won't get into, was one of those times that was more difficult for me. Now, I was just kind of starting to come out of that and feel a little bit better when I read this book, and so I think that the time I read it was really perfect for me. I loved the mental health representation in this book. The way that it talks about how mental health affects families and relationships, about the struggle that people who are suffering from mental health feel getting misdiagnosed and feeling nervous about treatments and not knowing if they're going to be effective, and people who don't struggle from mental health don't really understand that experience. Now, while this book in some ways was very relatable and I felt so understood reading parts of this book. The main character was anything but likable. She made a lot of decisions and did a lot of things that just made you really angry, and she treated the people around her honestly pretty terribly throughout the book. But also the struggle that she went through, I think, was just so well written and represented in here. I saw one review that talked about this book as the anti-love story, and there are different relationships that she goes through in this book, and it has kind of like a rom-com almost feel to it with the tone of the story, and with how much of the book is about her relationship with her husband. But it definitely isn't a book that focuses fully on romantic love. I wanted to share one of my favorite quotes. This is when our main character, Martha's husband, is talking to her. And he says, "Martha," he said afterwards, lying next to me, "everything is broken and messed up and completely fine. That is what life is. It's only the ratios that change, usually on their own. As soon as you think that's it, it's going to be like this forever, they change again. That is what life is and how it continued to be." And it kind of goes on, but I don't want to like spoil anything for you guys, but I just feel like that quote really embodies the voice of the story and kind of how I felt reading it, that emotional rawness. So as you guys can probably tell, I gave this book 5 stars. In some ways, it felt like reading a Sally Rooney book because none of the characters were the most likable, and you felt so frustrated for the decisions that they were making. I think it was a little bit less philosophical and a little bit more funny than Sally Rooney books that I've read. I would really highly recommend it. The easiest 5 stars I've given in quite a while. So I would be so surprised if anything that I read in this vlog or in a future vlog for the Women's Prize beats this book because of how much I loved it, but we will see. Maybe I'll be surprised. So it's another kind of gloomy day. It's the day before the Oscars, and I always have this like ambition to watch the Oscar films nominated for Best Picture, and every year it doesn't happen. So I had this idea today that I would just binge watch all of the movies that I have left to watch, but I instead just sat on the couch and did some reading. I don't know, maybe I'll watch like some of the winners after they are announced tomorrow. Anyways, I did start reading the Bread the Devil Knead. I started this last night and then read a bit of this morning. So this book takes place in Trinidad and follows our main character, Allie. She is a victim of domestic abuse, which is not a spoiler. It is in like the very first chapter of this book and also on the back. And you kind of follow her life working in a clothing store in like the town district, and also her kind of fear of coming home and her dealing with her abuser at home. The part where I just left off is actually also not a spoiler. It's on the back of the book, but she has just witnessed a murder between 2 people that were in a relationship, and the guy shot the girl as part of a domestic dispute. And I'm really interested to see how this kind of inciting event is going to maybe change her perception of her relationship that she's in. One of the most interesting parts of this book so far is that it's actually written in English, but in dialogue. So a lot of the sentence structure is a little bit different, and I was wondering if at the beginning of the book that would be more difficult to read or understand, but I actually have found myself to be like completely immersed in the writing, and I find like some of the ways that things are said to be really interesting and actually add a lot to the flavor of the story. On the very first page, it says, "It was dark in the bedroom, day clean still a good hour away. I hear the neighbor cock crowing anyway, as though he watched break. I didn't switch on the light because I living here 5 years and I could find anything here with my eyes closed." It kind of has like a poetic feel about it, and I really, really enjoy it. So most of the story is actually told that way and is in the present as you're following Allie and like her current relationship. But then you go to these chapters where you are following her growing up and meeting her cousin Colin, who gets like dropped off to live with the family, and their kind of dynamic growing up. And I don't know what it is about those parts of the story, but I'm just not as drawn to them and as excited about reading them. I don't know if there's going to be a bit more kind of tension or more energy in those parts as we go on, but I feel like right now I'm way more intrigued to see like how this relationship evolves over time and like what happens with this murder that she's just witnessed. And whenever we flash back, I feel like a bit of that energy is lost. But so far, I'm really enjoying the beginning of this, and I'm excited to see where this one ends up going. So this morning I finished the Bread the Devil Knead, and overall I enjoyed this book. I thought it was very readable. I was really invested in the story and the characters. I think there was a lot of tension and suspense building throughout the book, and I thought it was really immersive. As I was finished reading a chapter, I was ready to start the next one, and I was excited to see what would happen with these characters. However, unfortunately, this book didn't do a lot to go beyond what I expected. It didn't rise to be something exceptional. It was a very solid read. I think it was a very well-written book, and I think it had a lot to offer, but for me it was a little bit too predictable, and it didn't do anything that really blew me away. But I did give it a 3.75 stars and did enjoy reading it. Alrighty guys, that is it for this week's reading vlog. I would love to know if you are making your way through the Women's Prize list, which books you have read so far. If you have read any of the books that I chatted about in this vlog, what did you think of them? If you've read more than one, which was your favorite? I would love to know in the comments down below. So with that, I will see you very soon with another video. Bye.